Chapter 18. To the Dining Hall. Cal Fawley and half the team were in Draco's study when Harry got back to them. "Hi, boss," he greeted Harry. "The others aren't back yet. I don't know what's holding them up." "Did you get the little boy?" Harry asked. Cal nodded. "Mrs. Malfoy told us where to find him. They're all safe. The visitor didn't give us any trouble. He tried, but we were on him before his wand was out. The professor seemed surprised to see us. If anything, he looked relieved." "Well, that's a good sign, I suppose," Harry said. "We've got other things to think about now. Rowle is using old magic to stop anyone apparating in. Can you go out into the fields and see where you can disapparate? Then go to HQ and get the others back to that point. When you're back, bring them in here. Keep under cover. I'll let the team leaders know there's a delay." "Will do. See you soon, boss," Cal said. "Leave by the French doors in the next room," Harry added. "It's the way I came in. The house shelters this side from Rowle's people." Cal hurried out. This left Harry with 3 of the enforcement officers and 1 Auror. She was Aurora Benton. Aurora the Aura, as most called her. Aurora was good. So good, Harry felt guilty for having her on his team, as he had always known there would be a risk of his being called away. He needed someone capable who would lead the team in his absence. Harry found the waiting uncomfortable. He found being in Draco's house uninvited uncomfortable, despite the warm fire and sumptuous furnishings. They had left enough time to be sure that Rowle's people were in place for their ritual. No more of the unwelcome guests were arriving. He didn't want them to perform the ritual and find that the token Ambrose had left them was a dud. They would leave, and Harry would lose the opportunity to break up the organisation. Then he remembered Ambrose saying the token would cause all manner of strange effects, if used. That made Harry more nervous than the idea of Rowle discovering a dud. He wished he had asked Ambrose to explain. He'd had a week to prepare and hadn't thought. But then Ambrose was not being cooperative at the moment. He would most likely have wasted his time talking to the old warlock. Harry was on edge by the time his team returned from the ministry. After checking they were all together, he ordered the other team leaders, Ron, Gretchen Evancourt, and Dante Byrne, to move in. Malfoy Manor had a spacious dining room on the ground floor. This is where the interlopers had gathered. The teams would approach them from different directions, 3 on the same level and 1 from the floor above. Now they had to be as stealthy as possible. Harry led his team from the family quarters and up the sweeping staircase to the floor above. They felt exposed on the broad stairs, overlooked by the balcony and the rooms of the next floor. There were no lights, but the Aura office had brought in a supply of supersensory solutions. There was enough for all the team members. No wands were to be lit, no wand magic of any kind to be used until they were in place and ready to attack. They didn't want to be sensed by Rowle's people. Harry had briefed them on all his experiences in the Reddish House. Their enemy's ability to suppress wand magic had disturbed them even more than the nest of vampires. The task force officers would not use their wands until the last moment. The hope was that Rowle would not suppress wand magic if he thought it was safe. They had trained with other weapons, mainly swords and sharp stakes. Harry chose these as they would work against vampires. Swords could decapitate, and stakes of rowan could be driven through their hearts. Either of these would kill a vampire, and there were other things they could do to prevent the vampires from coming back afterwards. Fire was another effective weapon. Harry had worried about it getting out of control. He decided to ban the use of fire. Reaching the landing, they crept along the corridor leading away from the staircase. With their enhanced senses, they were painfully aware of the noise they were making. They were not used to the extra equipment they were carrying. Stakes clacked together, and swords sometimes clattered against doorways. At least they had had the foresight to pad the short swords in their scabbards. This had been Gretchen's idea. The lads were wary of Gretchen after realising how good she was with matters of weaponry and violence. Harry felt uneasy. He had got together as many officers as he could to build a task force of 40. This should easily outnumber Rowle's people, even including the vampires. They had tried to allow for the extra magical weaponry Rowle might have. Best of all, they had caught Rowle not unguarded, but at least unaware. But somehow, he was still uncertain of their success. It was hard to guess how much of a difference the vampires would make. It was impossible to guess what old magic Rowle could call on. Worst of all, it was a tremendous gamble, with almost every aura they had and all the best enforcement officers. If they were all killed or captured, the Ministry, the whole magical community, would be at Rowle's mercy. Rowle had precious little mercy, that much was certain. The formal dining hall of Malfoy Manor had a minstrel's gallery, a small balcony area overlooking the ground floor. There was also a small dungeon beneath, as Harry knew from his capture during the war. But they had had no way of getting into it without magic, which might have given them away. It was not really relevant anyway. Anyone trying to escape that way from the dining hall would find themselves trapped. Harry's task force had its own plans to prevent Rowle's people from disapparating. Harry's team would use the minstrel's gallery to attack Rowle from above. They just had to creep in unseen. That shouldn't be difficult. Minstrels in the gallery were there to be heard and not seen. There was a substantial wooden balustrade at the edge of the gallery. It had panels rather than spindles, and they could hide from view. Still, as they found the door leading to the gallery, Harry felt uneasy. He had the feeling he was being watched. He tried to tell himself it was Ambrose watching over them, but that didn't ease his mind. Ambrose had probably watched him numerous times. He had never had this feeling on those occasions. He carefully opened the door to the gallery and ushered his team in. Only 7 officers passed him. 2 were late or missing. He peered up and down the corridor. No one. The 2 missing were enforcement officers. Could they have deserted? But Harry knew them both. He knew his entire team. Not one of them would have deserted, even in the face of extreme danger. Then the answer struck him. Harry followed the remaining team members into the room and signalled for them to keep quiet. He used sign language to tell them 2 of the team were absent. He didn't mention his suspicion, but the looks on the faces of the others suggested that they were reaching the same conclusion. Someone knew they were there. It was probably the vampires, and they could be in touch with Rowle. Harry turned back to the door to test if it would open and allow them to retreat. There was no door, just a blank wall. Rowle had trapped them. Harry hazarded a glance over the balustrade and down into the dining hall. As he saw it was empty, he felt the buzz of the replicating scroll against his ribs. It was a message from Gretchen. Evancourt to all. In place. 3 of my team missing. Suspect vampires. Beware. Harry was about to message the other 2 teams to retreat when he heard a crash in the hall below. He looked down again. One of his teams was flooding into the empty hall. They were battling against opponents outside the door. It was Ron's team. They were using magic, setting up shield charms and firing spells around them. Harry felt a surge of excitement. They could use magic. That immediately made the vampires less threatening. On the other hand, it made the witches and wizards more of a problem. But at least they could fight back. Another team burst in through double doors at the far end of the hall. They were also being attacked from outside. Ron's team was being pushed back. Rowle's people flooding in through the doorway and spreading out along the walls. They were trying to get shots in around the team's shields. There was a crash below the gallery. Rowle's goons must be herding the last team into the hall. Harry leaned over the balcony to take a shot at the assailants flooding in through the doors. A blackness blotted out his vision. Harry crashed over onto his back, borne down by an irresistible weight. Fangs snapped at Harry's face, but he twisted away. A stunning spell hit the vampire, but bounced off in a shower of sparks. "Incarcerus!" barked Cal. Ropes instantly bound the vampire. Harry rolled out from under it. Max stepped forward and swung his sword, severing the vampire's head. Black blood gushed out, swilling across the gallery floor. Another black shape crashed onto the gallery, barreling into Tom Rutherford, another aura, in a storm of leathery wings. Tom slammed against the back wall, his sword clattering to the floor. Bright red blood washed over the gallery floor now, as the vampire tore away Tom's head and threw it down. Swords glinted, but the vampire spun on the spot, its wings beating away the attacks. Spells flashed, but again they dissipated in a shower of sparks as they hit the beast. Harry made his way to the balustrade, feet slipping on the blood. He braced as the vampire lunged at him. It didn't see the stake of Rowan Harry whipped out of his belt. Its momentum carried it over the balcony, ripping away the wooden handrail as it passed Harry, and crashed to the floor of the hall below, the stake piercing its heart. "Use Incarcerus, then stake them," Harry shouted to his team. 3 more vampires swooped onto the gallery. The vampires crowded the space with their black forms and their huge wings. Several badly aimed spells left the area littered with ropes. One vampire was bound, staked, and manhandled over the balcony by the 2 remaining enforcers. The auras were not doing so well. One vampire had pinned Mac in the corner, using its wing, while holding Aurora up against the wall with its claws. Cal was trying to find a way to use his sword on the vampire without putting Aurora in danger. Harry cast Incarcerus bonds at the vampire's legs. It staggered and stumbled as Aurora twisted in its grip. It had barely started to topple backwards when Cal swung his sword, but missed. Harry stood up, only to be grabbed from behind. Powerful claws bit into his shoulders. He could smell and feel foul breath on the back of his neck. He went to grab another stake with his left hand, but the claws lifted him off his feet. The pain in his shoulders was intense. His head swam with the ferocity of it. Then he was weightless. Training and experience came to Harry's aid. He managed to cast Arresto Momentum a split second before he hit the dining hall floor. It was not enough to stop him, but it prevented injury. The vampire flung itself on him from above. The stake in Harry's left hand caught the beast's side, and it twisted away, hissing and snarling. Harry finally freed his sword from its scabbard. As the enraged vampire rounded on him, he swung. The sword caught in its outstretched wing and missed the neck it sought. Harry almost overbalanced with the impetus of the swing. The beast moved towards him, but stopped and screeched in frustration. It was bound around the legs by magical cords. Harry swung back-handed with the sword and severed the vampire's head in a spray of froth and black blood. As it fell, Harry could see Aurora standing behind it, her wand still raised. They nodded to each other. Harry cast around them. Auras and enforcers were fighting vampires and wizards all across the hall. Dante had backed his team into a corner. Shield spells were up against the barrage of spells, but the vampires could barge through them as if they were cobwebs. They swept their swords and brandished their stakes, but the vampires darted back and forth, gouging with their claws. Harry and Aurora stood back to back. Elsewhere in the hall, the task force members duelled and fought with Rowle's people in single combat. Spells flashed back and forth. Wizards parried and dodged. Vampires kept appearing to harass the combatants. Harry saw one such beast tear a wizard's head from his shoulders. It didn't appear to be one of Harry's people. The vampires were going into a kind of blood frenzy, tearing at anyone who came near them. Harry had read of such things, but it was hideous and sickening to behold. The floor of the hall was sticky with spilt blood. Before long it would be slick. It would be hard to keep your feet, making wielding a sword all but impossible. Harry could feel a tide changing. The flow of the battle was going against the task force. They should retreat, but to turn one's back on one's foes would be suicide. The vampires would swoop. If the vampires defeated the task force, who would be left to stop Rowle? Harry fought on. He alternated between swinging at vampires with his sword and parrying spells with his wand. He could barely make the defensive moves he needed to stay alive. It left him no opportunity to fight back. He wished he had 2 right arms. Wielding his sword in his right hand meant he had to use his wand with his left. It felt wrong, and the spells he cast were weaker than usual. He fought side to side, sometimes back to back with Aurora. They tried to make their way towards Dante's group. They seemed to have the best defensive position. Hopeless though it was, backed into a corner.